This is where we are, folks. We're in the Passion. We are talking about Monday and Tuesday. I hope that you've had a chance to kind of look at that text in Mark, and I'm very grateful for our soon-to-be Dr. Shea Watts. I've been teasing him, calling him Dr. Watts all week, because he is now he's finished with his dissertation, and he's just got to defend it and do a few more things, and then we got to make him the Reverend Doctor. That's the next move. So we're working on it. But one of the great joys of being in partnership in ministry with this character right here, this Shea Watts guy that I love like my own son. The great thing is that there are moments whenever you can just call up and say, "Oh, I am overwhelmed," and the first things out of his mouth are, "What do you need me to do?" And I just said, it would really be wonderful. You've got this anyway. If you would just take the Thursday night Bible study so I can have some headspace to think about all this other stuff. And he said, "I got it." And off we go. So I am putting us all in the capable hands, we know that, of the ever wonderful Shea Watts. So take it away, my brother.
Absolutely. Well, good evening, everyone. It's great. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Well, it's great to be with you. And as Pastor Tim said, I'm always happy to jump in to help. And I just hope y'all know how much Pastor Tim loves each of you, and how much energy it takes to write all the blogs and make sermons and put videos together and all that. It really is a labor of love for him, and it's one of the greatest honors in my life to serve with him in this way, and also to be a part of his community. I do not take it for granted, and I just wanted to say that. So let's pray. I just want to invite you now to just take a moment and maybe close your eyes, and if you need to turn your camera off, whatever you need to do to just be in a place where you feel comfortable, where whatever maybe was you were thinking about before this, whether it's dinner or getting things together, worries of our day, stress, work, weather, all the things that when they add up, they can take great toll on the body. Our body keeps score. And so before we begin tonight, I just want to invite you to just, as you feel led, to just close your eyes and take a deep breath in and exhale. Let's take another deep breath in and exhale. And let's take a final breath together. Breathe in and breathe out. Gracious God, we thank you for your breath in our lungs, your life in our bones. We thank you for your presence with us when times are great, when times are not. And as we pause in this time of Lent, as we study and look forward to the final week of the life of Jesus, I pray that you would stir in us that reminder, stir in us that confidence, that hope, that we can put our hope and our trust in you, because you care for us, and because you care for us, you call us to care for one another. And that is the beauty of this work that we share. It is a work of the people. It is our work, and it is done out of love. So we give you this conversation. I pray that you inspire us to greatness, to goodness, to living lives worthy of your name and your love. And it's in the name by the one we've come to know you. You have many names. I call you Jesus. Amen. So as we begin tonight, I want to offer a little caveat here. As much as I would love to, we do not have time, okay, to address all that is going on Monday and Tuesday of Jesus' final week. We spent an entire lesson on Palm Sunday, and rightly so. But given that Tuesday is the longest day in Mark's narrative, we simply cannot walk through everything on Monday and Tuesday. We can, however, highlight certain events and speak to the overarching story that Mark is weaving together. So we begin tonight's study with a text with the cursing of the fig tree, Pastor Tim already we were talking about cursing with Dr. Terrell, and then the subsequent problems, right, that ensue at the temple as Jesus moves into Jerusalem. And so before we get into our conversation with Dr. Terrell, I would like for us to set up that time and to read a couple passages from Monday and Tuesday of this week in Mark's gospel, at least. And I think, it's really important that we read these two things, the fig tree, and then also the greatest commandment, because these two parts of the story featured in our conversation, and the Great Commandment in particular sits in a really interesting part of it. So I think if we read this together, we will all be well prepared for the conversation that we recorded this week. And so I would like to invite, would anyone like to read this opening passage, which is about the fig tree in the temple? If so, go ahead and jump in. If not, I'm happy to read it.
On the following day, when they came from Bethany, he was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to see whether perhaps he would find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. He said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard it. Then they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who were selling and those who were buying in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. He was teaching and saying, "Is it not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations'? But you have made it a den of robbers." And when the chief priests and scribes heard it, they kept looking for a way to kill him. But they were afraid of him, because the whole crowd was spellbound by his teaching. And when evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city.
Thank you. And then one more. Would anyone like to read this great commandment here that we have in Mark chapter 12?
I'll read it.
Go ahead.
One of the scribes came near and heard them disputing with one another. And seeing that he answered them well, he asked him, "Which commandment is the first of all?" Jesus answered, "The first is, 'Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." Then the scribe said to him, "You are right, teacher. You have truly said that he is one, and besides him there is no other. And to love him with all the heart and with all the understanding and with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself, this is much more important than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices." When Jesus saw that he answered wisely, he said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." After that, no one dared to ask him any question.
So with those two passages, so we have the fig tree, the temple, and now the Great Commandment. Let us begin our conversation. Well, welcome back, Gather friends and family. We're so excited to continue our conversation today with Dr. Terrell. Last week, she began to talk us through the passion of Jesus and helping us understand it, reframing it for us. And this week, we want to talk about how that passion, born of pain and expressed in justice and love, as she demonstrated, compelled Jesus to act, to interrupt the ongoing injustices in his time. So we're looking specifically at this study at Monday and Tuesday of his final week, where Jesus and his followers come into conflict with those who would use their power to exploit and oppress others. We have to address the cursing of the fig tree and the cleansing, what's been called the cleansing of the temple premises. because systems of oppression had coalesced and had localized around political, religious, and economic practices. So we want to spend some time here with the happenings of Monday and Tuesday, for they are framed, that Mark does so well with these frames or these sandwiches, by a fig tree, which is a sign or symbol for what is going on and what is to come. So welcome back, Dr. Terrell.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being with us again. And so I want to open it up right now, and let me ask you, when you look at Jesus and the fig tree, what do you see?
I see a very human response of irritation, hangriness, as they, hangry. He was hangry. And I know what the feeling of being hangry is like, hungry and angry because there's nothing to eat. There's nothing to address that physical satisfaction. But I also see irritation, not just at the fig tree, but at all of the events that are coalescing around Jesus right now. All of the things that are coming to his attention, particularly in his last week of life on earth. I mean, the people say that somehow people who are dying know that they're going to die somehow. And I think that's on some cosmic level true in a way that's not demonstrable to us who are living and have some life left to live. I think that's true because in my own mother's case, who was murdered when I was a teenager, the day of the before the day of the day during the day she died, during the daytime, she died at night, during the daytime of the day on which she died, she apologized to me deeply for some egregious wrongs to me. And we cried and we held each other so close. This is something that we never did before. I don't know if I could have forgiven myself had that not taken place. And I think that somehow my mother knew she was going to die. That's just an anecdotal thing, but I think other people can attest to people doing things that they wouldn't normally do just before they cross over. But I think Jesus knew he was going to die. I knew that Rome was gunning for him, and that religious authorities were outraged by his actions. And I think he was irritated in his spirit, because life is a beautiful thing. Life is good. And I think what this shows, instead of a flat picture of a flat Jesus who had no emotions, who had no emotional connectivity, it shows a person who has the full range of human emotions. And that doesn't remove from him his capacity to desire to do God's will. It doesn't remove from him his obligation that he took on himself because of love. And it doesn't remove from love the complication of all the other emotions that press in on a person. And I want to quote myself here from a lecture I gave called "It's Complicated: The Dialectics of Love in the African American Experience," on my own definition of love. I said, but love, if it can be defined at all, is anything but simplistic. Love is not merely a set of beautiful words such as patient, kind, long-suffering, unenvious, self-effacing. Love in private affairs and love in the public square is an unfolding, lived experience. And sometimes love is impatient, nervous, overreaching, and fiercely proud, a reflexive, if an inexhaustible resource, and an unflinching mirror of how much progress we have made and how far we have to go in learning its ways. As we mature as individuals and as members of of overlapping communities of accountability, our understanding of love must be complicated by experience. And it's this experience of Jesus, of knowing that he was a person of consequence. Even if you attribute to him the knowledge that he was God in flesh, and I doubt if he thought himself that way, but other people thought himself that way because of the way he loved. You have to attribute to him all of this this definition of love, this whole range of what love actually means, not just a flat experience of pleasantness. That's not what love is. So.
I love that, Dr. Terrell. Thank you for reading that definition. You know, the thing it struck me when you said unflinching mirror, right? Because I think to some degree, right, that Jesus came as an unflinching mirror, right?
Yes.
To both
Yes.
that whole human and divine, right? It shows us how far, you know, shows us our injustices, shows us our hypocrisy, and at the same time shows us what God is like, right? What the kingdom or the community of God should be like.
And
That's
you
right.
know, doing justice sometimes, you know, that may call for some things that you don't necessarily want to do. You don't always want to confront everything that is unjust. You don't necessarily want to do that because it brings attention to yourself. It brings negative repercussions to yourself. It brought negative repercussions to Jesus, and he knew that it would.
Mm-hmm.
He knew
That's
that
right.
it would.
That's right.
He was well aware that it would.
Yeah.
And I think that irritation underneath is like, why can't these people get this thing together? Why can't my fellow travelers really understand what is required of them when they have the word? They have had the word for a long time. They've had the word calling for justice. They've had the word calling for, you know, some fight. Some fight. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For a long time. They've had the prophets a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a great segue into the conversation that maybe we can, Dr. Terrell, you can speak a little bit about the temple, because I think you're exactly right. I think Jesus comes, you know, with this prophetic message, this prophetic mandate, if you will, to judge a system that, you know, political, religious, and you know, and economic, right, that he is exposing here. But to do so, you know, he's quoting Jeremiah, which is exactly what you're saying. Like, this has been a problem. Like, you've had the word from God, but here comes Jesus sort of stepping into this role. And so, you know, he curses the fig tree. Why? Because it's probably, you know, the closest thing to him, you know, and it's not in season. It shouldn't have fruit on it, but you know, but we'll return to that later. But so we progress, and Jesus moves into the temple space, right, where he essentially starts a commotion or a riot, if you will, with vendors who are selling animals to be provided for sacrifice. And of course, we know that this is an unjust system, that people are being exploited, that people are using people's anxiety and really religious desires to be made right with God. That's why they're coming to the temple. They want to do business to be right with God. They're getting in the way rather than being the way. They're in the way, and not only are they in the way, but they're profiting off of this sacrificial system. And so Jesus comes into this, and you know, and he's going to be opposed by religious leaders. He's going to be opposed by political leaders, and especially for those that where those overlap. But also there's this economic system that Jesus is sort of judging. And so here we are. Can you maybe speak to us, Dr. Terrell, a little bit about this whole sacrificial system, because it brings up really important ideas in Christian thought.
I don't think Jesus's issue was with the sacrificial system and what it intended to convey. But I think what it had become was a business. In the Aaronic priestly understanding of the animal sacrificial system, even animal sacrifice should be something that is minimally done in community. It's done in order to provide the basis for reconnection with those who have been disconnected from each other. God provides the system of sacrifice so that people have a cultic instrument whereby they can render themselves back in relationship with each other. So the sacrificial animal provides the basis of the common meal. That's how we have been able to interpret Jesus's death in light of the Aaronic system. But I think that, like you said, people have made this into a business. People have forgotten the initial impetus behind it, and this happens in a lot of religious traditions where people forget the meaning of the ritual. The ritual is not there to serve itself. The ritual is there to serve people, to serve the purpose of keeping people together.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think he's really responding very deeply out of his frustration as a member of the Jewish community who's had this understanding of the meaning of sacrifice for a very long time, but he's saying you've simply forgotten that this is supposed to be a house of prayer and not a house simply of commerce. So I think his frustration was real. It was deep. And I don't think that he saw his pending death as replacing the sacrificial system. I think his followers saw it as replacing the sacrificial system. His followers elevated him to that kind of significance because they loved him so much. He taught them so much.
I think that's really critical, and I think the element that always gets lost, particularly, and this is a favorite talking point of mine, particularly gather, is this fetishization of Jesus as the personal savior, right? So that it is that when he was nailed to the cross, I was on his mind, kind of stuff, right? That kind of thinking, which really takes the spotlight off of the fact that Jesus was willing to go to the death to prove his love, and somehow or another makes this about me again, right? And what that also does, and in context of what you're talking about, is it now turns this situation, this sacrificial act, away from building community and restoring community into something that is a personal benefit to me, and this is going to keep me out of hell and all this kind of stuff, which is not at all the context of the sacrifice. The sacrifice in the Hebrew Bible is always about reconciliation. One person has done wrong to someone else. Now you have to bring a sacrifice, and you bring the sacrifice. And yes, that for those, I want to stress this, that common meal, when the animal it wasn't like, okay, we've killed 5 doves, let's throw them away now. Those doves were offered back, and the very people who had come for forgiveness and reconciliation sat down together to eat that very food that had been sacrificed. That gets lost. Even though in Christianity, we've sort of built that into the equation with the Eucharist. That's sort of where the Eucharist grows out of, that there must be a meal coming out of the sacrifice that pulls us all together. But I think that a lot of times in Christianity, we have been, Jesus died for your sins, Jesus died for my sins, it's me, it's you, it's me, and it's not us. And it's not what that death could signify in terms of why we can find a way to come together, even in our differences, even in this kind of hangry kind of love. You know what I'm saying? Even in that, because there has been a sacrifice that brings us together.
I was just going to say, I think this really brings the last place we wanted to land, which is thinking about all this going on in this Monday and Tuesday, right in the middle of all of this, right? We get this interaction with Jesus, and it says that one of the scribes, kind of comes near and hears this dispute, right? Hears them talking to each other. and kind of gets smart and says, okay, so Jesus, and trying to trap Jesus, of course, always. Which commandment is the first of all? And I love that Jesus, he talks about the Shema, right? Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And then he says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. And so like that, I would think would be the answer for first, right? But then he says, but the second, right? Because always tethered to this, always, whether, Jesus or in, Micah and throughout the prophets, and even in the beginning, as you mentioned in the Adam and Eve story, there's always this community, right? God's all up in the middle of all our relationships and part of them. The second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no greater than these. And I just think that really kind of encapsulates our time with our conversation today, because it's about love, and it's about a God that always comes near to us, right? This passion that, that this love that feels pain, this love that is compelled to do justice, to act justly, to walk humbly, right? And to love mercy, and all of this, I think is really is connected. And I think it really summarizes this week really well. Pastor Tim wrote revolutionaries, right? This love is revolutionary. Why? Because it not only changes things for us individually, it changes us. It changes how we can relate to one another. And when we begin to change in community and in relationship with one another, systems begin to change, systems that we have a part in shaping. And so I just wanted to name that I think that this, that maybe we could spend a few minutes and end our time thinking about the Great Commandment and how Jesus is linking love of God and God as love with our love with one another, right? And our commitment to
I loved his response to Jesus. Well, he says, well, I suppose that is right, because if you do those things, then you'll be in good stead with God. And Jesus says to him, you're not far from the kingdom of God. You're not far from the kingdom. You understand something more than you think you do. And and I thought that I just love that story about Jesus. And he says, you're not far. You're not far.
Yeah.
You got a little ways to go. I think that's so awesome. The unflinching mirror again. You're not far. You got some. If you have to keep on asking that question,
Yeah.
you still got a ways to go. You don't have to keep on asking that. You know the law. You already know. You already know. But you keep on asking the question, so you got some ways to go. You keep asking the question because it's distracting others from your lack of progress. So
yeah.
I think but it's really cool. What a great story.
I love that story.
I love it too. I'm like, wow.
Yes.
Well, maybe I'm not far if I learn how to love in truth.
This has been a really good conversation, and I'm grateful again for your time, Dr. Terrell, and your wisdom, and for sharing that with us, and Pastor Tim, you as well. And this concludes our second week. We're talking about revolutionaries, and I'm excited to kind of walk through those scriptures tomorrow night with the Gather study. And then next week we'll come back and we'll actually look at Wednesday of Jesus's final week, which we encounter this wonderful woman who is nameless in Mark's gospel, but she brings her alabaster jar and she anoints Jesus. And I just think it's truly a beautiful story. History has been unjust to her. We don't know her name, but we give thanks for her and her service to Jesus. But we'll talk about that, and I look forward to our time together, and just grateful to be on this journey with two wonderful people. So
me too.
I'm grateful for you.
Yes, absolutely. This has been beautiful.
All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope if anything resonated with you or an idea stuck out to you, I hope that you'll think about it as we walk through this next bit. And then I do would love for us to spend a little bit of time at the end in conversation, discussion, because I would love to hear your thoughts. And maybe, we would have some questions for one another. So I do want to look at the loose framework of Monday and Tuesday this final week. And remember that in Palm Sunday, that Jesus comes in and out of the city, right? In opposition to the powers that are operating. So Jesus is kind of being very intentional about where he goes and when he goes there. And so we see throughout the week that Jesus is coming in and out. But it's really important for us to understand that from the drop, from the first moment, that this movement is in stark contrast, even antithetical, to the religious, political, and economic practices and powers of the day. So if we look at the fig tree and how it fits into the story, we discover one of Mark's literary devices, right? So the Markan frame or sandwich, and I'm going to come back to this in a second. So it's clear that Mark's author wants us to connect the fig tree with the temple, okay? And since it's the week of Passover, as we've already mentioned, the fig tree would not have fruit. It would not be what we call in season. Yet Jesus, who is hangry, as Dr. Terrell said, and I can relate to often, expects fruit for nourishment. So he curses the tree to wither and no longer bear fruit. That the tree is not expected to bear fruit and is cursed for this should shift. Okay, it should shift our reading of this story from literal to the symbolic. Okay, because now we need to kind of ask, okay, if the fig tree isn't supposed to have fruit, what is Jesus doing, right? Like, what is the author of Mark trying to present to us? Okay, the fig tree image is a loaded one. Okay, perhaps we would be more familiar with other trees or plants, but for Mark's audience, the word fig tree, the idea of a fig tree, it would have made certain connections that are not immediately clear to us. The fig tree, in the biblical tradition, if we look back to the Hebrew Bible, it was associated with the vine as an emblem of peace and prosperity, as in the prophets, both Micah and Isaiah. On the other hand, the failure of the fig crop and the destruction of a fig tree were regarded as misfortune and even judgment from God in the Psalms. And I have a couple examples of this in a few minutes. But young figs, okay, figs that have just, the fruit is fresh, they were especially prized for their sweetness and flavor. And it's important to know that the fruit always appears before the leaves, okay? And so when Jesus sees this, he's sort of prophetically pronouncing judgment on the tree, but also anticipating that fruit. And then Israel also is like the fig tree. So the temple, yes, and also Jerusalem. And so as we think about the fig tree, we need to realize it's about the tree and it's about much more than the tree, right? And then he goes into the temple. And I think it's important to kind of see how this relates, right? So we have the cursing of the fig tree. Jesus goes into the temple, comes out, and then we have a tax question. Then we have the Great Commandment or the First Commandment, which we just talked about, and then the Tuesday narrative ends with Jesus essentially foretelling the destruction of the temple or the end of the age, which makes sense in light of the cursing of the fig tree and it withering away. Okay, and so this fig sandwich. I hope none of you would eat this. Money is very dirty. But I thought this was an interesting picture. So here we're finding a literary device. This is a Markan frame, or Ted Jennings called them a sandwich, and that's basically a literary device where something happens, and then some incident A. So Jesus curses the fig tree. Then incident B happens. Jesus goes to the temple, starts a commotion, drives people out, and then it returns to the fig tree, where Peter remembers what Jesus said, and Peter notes that the fig tree has in fact withered. And here are a couple of the scriptures, as I mentioned, about the fig tree. So we see here in Micah, you sit under their own vines and under their own fig trees, and no one shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. So there's comfort here, right there. There's a sense of safety. And then in Psalm 105, God struck their vines and fig trees and shattered the trees of their country. So again, the fig tree is much, it's symbolically symbolizing this sort of prosperity. And then finally in Hosea, like grapes in the wilderness, I found Israel like the first fruit on the fig tree in its season. And remember, that first fruit is particularly sweet. And so Israel here is symbolically represented as a fig tree that is bringing forth fruit. So this cursing the fig tree is just loaded with symbolic language. Then he enters the temple, and we all know the temple at that point in that day was the center of religious life. It's where God resided, God's presence. So people would come up and would come up to Jerusalem, and they would seek to have a sacrifice, and to have that sacrifice essentially atone them of their sins every year. Atonement. And that was the system that was in place at his time. And so when Dr. Terrell says that people weren't listening to the word of the Lord, and that they had the word for some time, here's an example of that. This is Jeremiah 7, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. I just want to highlight two things. One, I want to highlight verse 4 that 3 times says, "This is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord," right? And this is a call to repentance. Let's look at verse 5. "For if you truly amend your ways and your doings, if you truly act justly with one another, if you do not oppress the alien, the orphan, the widow, or shed innocent blood in this place, if you do not go after other gods to your own hurt, then I will dwell with you in this place." So there's a promise connected to the temple. So as long as the people are just, the people are listening to God and doing what God says. But guess what? That's not what's going on. And in fact, Jesus comes and said, you've turned, this a den of thieves, right? Because of what's going on. And so, if this is where God resides, and if this is where atonement is made, then what Jesus is doing is not only important but consequential. So if we think about what happened and what Mark is suggesting, we can see some parallels going on between the fig tree and the temple. Pastor Tim, were you going to chime in here?
I was just going to chime in for a minute, because I think it's very hard for us as 21st century Americans to really get in our bones what the temple means to the people of Jesus, to Jesus's, his contemporaries, right? To this entire Jewish nation. There are a few things to bear in mind. First of all, they talked about the temple as the navel of the world, as the navel of life. And they just believed that this is where God resided. And this was the place where you went in Israel to find God. It was not like in Christianity where God is everywhere. That was not the temple was God's abode. And therefore all of life and everything that they experienced in their minds in a metaphysical sense came out of this temple. So there was a place in the temple that was the Holy of Holies. It was so holy, only the certain kinds of priests at certain times could go in there. It was like getting into the inner sanctum of holiness, right? And so there is this very deep sense of what this place is and what it means. And what happens is the temple is also the anchor of the Jewish identity. It has always been the place that, when the first temple was destroyed, Solomon's temple was destroyed, and after the Babylonian conquest, they came back. The first task was to rebuild the temple. That was it. It was like, we'll get to the rest of it later. Let's rebuild the temple. And so I don't think we have a parallel. You can't even say the U.S. Capitol would compare, for the most patriotic kind of Americans, to the depth of feeling that people have for this place because of what it means. And so the fig tree parallel is really interesting, because Jesus finds that the fig tree is in leaf, we hear, which means the fruit's already gone. It's not that we're waiting for the fruit. The fruit's already gone. He's late. And he curses the tree because it looks full, but there's no substance there. Yep. And that's kind of what Mark is wanting to parallel in the temple. The temple's up and running, all kinds of full stuff going on. Jesus is going to walk into this crowd, but at the same time, there's no sweetness and there's no life and there's no nourishment happening there. And so that's kind of when I read about the temple, and I just pray when I read, it's like, God, I wish I could just feel what these people feel about this place. Maybe we might connect it with like the way that Muslims feel about Mecca, perhaps. It is such a sacred place that it requires we just don't have that site in Christianity. We had churches, so it's a place you drop in on Sunday and then you get out as quick as you can, right? That's a very different feeling than what's going on here.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you, Pastor Tim. And I thank you for naming sort of you have the outer courts, the inner courts, and the Holy of Holies. So Jesus clears out the outer court of the temple, right? Where the money changers and the animal merchants are, people that are profiting off others' desires to be made right with God. And, a lot of people speculate that this is likely the act that led to his crucifixion. And I would argue that it's a lot of reasons, and we'll get into more of those as the week goes on. But I think we have to decide for ourselves what to make of this story to some extent. We could be a violation of the sanctity of the temple, or an end to Gentile exclusion. In this passage it says, a house of prayer for all nations. Okay, so we can see kind of the bigger picture of what God is doing. Or just the purported economic advantage and collusion between a temple system and Roman economics. If they're exchanging money and the exchange rate is sort of exploiting people to pad the pockets of the people doing it, we can clearly see there's something going on here that is awry.
The thing about the money changing too is really important, because the Jews did not trade with Roman coin.
Right.
They had their own coin. They had their own money system, because they were not allowed what is one of the first commandments? You shall not make any graven image. So having a coin with Caesar's face on it for them it was a sinful act to carry that coin around in your pocket. It was a graven image of someone who purported to be God or the Son of God, right? They were having none of it. So the Jews traded on shekels. But by now the temple, because the temple is in Rome's pocket and the temple people are in Rome's pocket, these money changers are in there and these merchants are in there, and they're trading in Roman coin right there in the temple. I come in with my shekels. I can't buy the sacrifices I need to get remediation for whatever wrong I may have done to somebody else and get all that cleared away at this time of sacrifice. I got to turn my shekels into denarii, or else I can't even get my own salvation on, right? And so there's a real problem that's going on there with these money changes. And we sort of gloss over that. We always want to get to the people that got the doves and stuff. But those money changes are problematic, sitting right there in the front court. It would be like, in the vestibule of the church, turn your money out. Let's get your money changed so that you can get what you need to go on in and give your sacrifice to the priest. It's such a shame and a scandal.
Yeah. And if anyone's ever traveled, right, and you go to the airport, you're not going to get the same exchange rate at the airport that you would get somewhere before you're leaving that country. And what I found is that the airport's going to give you a much less favorable rate for your money as you're exchanging, because by that time, it's too late. And so, Tim, you led me right to where I want to kind of finish tonight. And so our final little bit here of analysis is the tax question. Some, not all, Herodians and Pharisees want to entrap Jesus. They want to pit him between his religious and national identity and responsibility, forcing him to err in one way or another. But Jesus always is too smart for their game. I was doing some digging this week, and I found that Josephus documented a leader named Judas, not the Judas you're thinking of, but a Judas, a zealot, in 6 to 7 Common Era, so a little bit before this time. But Judas organized a movement to worship God alone and refused to pay taxes to Caesar. So this is going on in the background as well. And remember, as Tim said, that the Roman coin had the image of Caesar and his claim as Son of God, both of which are idolatrous claims. So how does Jesus respond? Well, he asks for a Roman coin, denarius, because I love this. He doesn't have one. Does anybody have, does anybody got that, does anybody got it? Okay. And so someone brings him one and he says to them, whose head is this and whose title? I love that because Jesus already knows the answer, but he asks it anyways, like a good teacher. And they answered, the emperor's. So Jesus said to them, give the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's. And they were utterly amazed at him. I love this because Jesus wisely, right, outmaneuvers this question, but this question raises other questions. So what things do belong to the emperor, and what things do belong to God? Well, of course, that's a matter of perspective. We gather that the coin belongs to Caesar because it has his face on it, but what belongs to God? We're reminded. Borg and Crossan talk about the psalm that says the earth is the Lord's and the fullness therein. If we think of the creation, if we think about we as human beings as bearing God's likeness and image, we belong to God. So there's a case to be made here that the only thing that really belongs to Caesar here is the money that he has printed. Everything really belongs to God. And so as we think about that, our attention should return to the happenings of Palm Sunday. On one side of the city, Pilate enters with the pomp and prestige of the Roman Empire. On the other side of the city is a theater of the oppressed, an anti-imperial demonstration that harnesses the cries and hopes of conquered people. Jesus enters to show us a way, not only a way, but a better way, a kingdom for those who have been crushed by political, religious, and economic practices. Who is it, Caesar or Jesus? So I want to pause here, or stop here rather, and I want to just open it up for any conversation, any questions, any comments about the video, about any of the stuff we talked about tonight. Would love to hear from you.
Yeah, Shay, you know, what you were saying about with the talking about selling food with animals in it, you know, with animals as food, like being like how you were saying, like it's turned into more of a business now than, you know, more a commodity now than it has been a sort of gift giving up economy, you know. But that's a huge thing in among Native American peoples with the in terms of food, is like they didn't just slay the animal. No, they were honoring the animal because they would use every single part of it, and they would actually thank the animal for allowing the people to eat. You know, because like I said before, when I talked about like several months ago, like I think it was like probably last spring or something. Yeah, it was like really several months ago, where I mentioned the tale of the white buffalo calf woman, where she said everything was on an equal scale to the people. And it's not just in North America either. Even in Japan, they said the phrase "itadakimasu," where, and what they do is and that basically means that I received this food. That's what they commonly are known to do in Japan. Like there are many people around the world who are taught to be respectful towards food.
Yeah, and that respect comes with a certain mindfulness, right? And that connection, that brings an awareness that we're part of life in this connectedness. But you're exactly right. So many people, it's not mindful, and it's in fact exploitative in the same way that the people are exploiting other people, exploiting the animals for food or for game or sport or whatever, rather than being aware. Yeah.
Well, there's also some challenges in the system itself. And I think I mentioned this last week. If I didn't, I should have. A lot of the temple elite and the folks that are sort of in bed with the Romans for all practical purposes, right? They keep sort of letting this slide and that slide and everything. These people are also have great agricultural land outside of Jerusalem, which was not supposed to be. That's not the way that was supposed to work. You're not supposed to have. In fact, Jesus tells a story in this passage of Mark about tenant farmers. A farmer's gone away. He's actually talking about these people and how they're running their business. They're getting money off of land that they're not tilling. They're making money off of livestock that they're not raising, right? They've got people doing the dirty work for them while they're all up in the temple. And when Jesus tells that story of the tenant farmers, it upsets the people, these temple these people, folks. I mean, he's telling the story about they come in and they kill the owner's son and all kinds of stuff. He's got a lot going on there, but he's really kind of, when he says, these people had this farm. The point I really want to get to is most of the livestock then is being brought in and sold at exorbitant, bigger than Whole Food kind of rates, to these people that are coming in. Most of them have traveled into the city for Passover. Most of them are very poor. They're in there. It's sort of like an obligation to get here. And the markup on this meat is huge. And whose meat is this? It's the people that have taken all the agriculture in and around Jerusalem to raise this food. So the money is actually, it's trickling up into the pockets of the temple officials and authorities. All of this is between the lines in what Mark is talking about. Mark's readers will get it right away. It's like, yeah, those skunks, in the temple, they are the ones. It's not just that they're letting the prices be high. It's their food that they're selling. They're making the money. Where's this money going? And so you have this sort of weird capitalism, pre-capitalism capitalism that's run crazy, and you've got religious leaders who are turning a blind eye to deep, deep infractions in what's required of the purity of the temple because it profits them. It just profits them. My mama used to always say, listen closely to what the preacher preaches about and how the preacher does, because that's going to tell you a whole lot about what the preacher, I mean, you all know me, what ticks me off and what I get upset about, that tells you a whole lot about me, right? Well, it's that same kind of idea. And when preachers are turning blind eyes to injustice, particularly economic injustice, and the prosperity gospel is where you probably want to go with that, right? But in any of that, when they turn blind eyes to that, the first thing I want to do is I would like to see your banking statements. Because if people in the environment that you're in charge of keeping sacred are transgressing and gouging folks, I know you're in on the grift. I just know you've got to be in on the grift somehow. And that's really a point that we may miss. We just tell the story like Jesus got in and he didn't like the way these people were doing and he got upset and turned over the tables. Jesus is deeply grieved. If he was hangry at the fig tree, he is pissed off by the time he gets into the temple, because this is a temple that is full of green leaves but has no fruit. And what does he say earlier? By their fruit you'll know them. And so there's no fruit in this place. And all right, but that's so I think that the deal with the animals is really important, not just because they're animals. And Tony, I really appreciate that. You're exactly right. But it's also the deal that where these animals come from, where they come from is enriching the very people that are ignoring and letting this travesty go on.
Yeah, Tim, and it's right because it's not just in North America. I mean, sometimes and people need meat to survive. I mean, it's ironic that people hate the groups like the Inuit for hunting beluga whales, and I'm like, well, they live, and I'm like, seriously, these people live up in the Arctic. Okay, and I'm like, do me a favor, you get up, go outside, sell your property, and then move up to the Arctic, which, by the way, has barely any arable farmland. I mean, if there is farmland out there, it's only temporary. So you'd basically be hunting other animals for like half the year. Seriously, do you know how hard it would be to be an Arctic vegan?
Well,
and even the Sami people of Northern Scandinavia, and Tim, you might know them that they're called you called them Laplanders before, but that is kind of a derogatory term towards them, so I wouldn't really use that. But they depend heavily. But they depend heavily on reindeer, and that's why there's sort of a bit not as much trust towards people who want to bring wolves back to Northern Scandinavia because they're fearing for their reindeer herds.
Yeah.
So the context is very important.
Lisa, you were saying something?
No, that Tony has raised this to me before, and I always think, I've said to him, hey, take this up with Shay. You ought to talk to Shay about it and see what he, has to say about it. But probably offline. That's a separate conversation.
Yeah, I'd love to have that conversation.
Yeah, I think that it is. I think that it's interesting, and it's always sort of there's sort of situational analyses that have to come into play, right? A good friend of mine, he's gone now, Gary Kielhoffner, was an occupational therapist who did research with the people of the northern parts of Finland, way up in the Arctic Circle. And he would go and he would live with them for like 6 months, and he would come back, and I would always want to know stories about what it's like to live in, ice huts and all this kind of stuff, and he very much had that sort of glamorous kind of National Geographic Channel kind of life going on. And he said one of the hardest things always he had to brace himself was that they lived on seal meat. And that's what they lived on. It was what was available. And he said, it doesn't taste good. And it's hard for me to eat the cute baby seals and all this kind of stuff. But if I don't eat it, I will be the dead researcher up there. And so there are certain kinds of things. I think why I don't, the vegan thing for me is that when you can make the choice, it's a choice you should consider. That's what it is, and there are a lot of people who just aren't making the choice and aren't being careful in their choices about food, period. But even if you're eating meat, what are you eating and where is that coming from and what is that doing? And after this COVID thing has been a real eye opener for us all, I think about injustices that are happening in meatpacking plants, and we should be mindful of some of that. And so, all right, I'm not the guy to really talk about it, because after dinner I'm gonna have our usual Taco Bell tacos and the chicken burrito. That's that's our Thursday night post Bible study dinner. The only time we eat fast food.
Stepping back a bit as well, Shay. Stepping back into this whole narrative around the kind of last week is always kind of remembering that Jesus was the antagonist here, in that this was set in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is at least a week's walk from Galilee. Jesus is never in Jerusalem for any length of time anywhere else. And the Gospels say he's well known in Galilee. So Galilee actually is those weird folks up north that aren't like us, and they're poor and they're looked down upon. And even in the Gospels where it talks about Jesus being in synagogues in Galilee would have been little house churches. They weren't buildings. They weren't the kind of religious people of Jerusalem. Hence why kind of when these stories start coming out of Galilee, they send priests down from Jerusalem to see what's happening out in the sticks. And the trial of Jesus, if it was done in Jewish fashion, they would have sent out to have people come forward and defend Jesus, which again kind of goes back to the significance of the disciples running away and Peter denying Jesus. Is actually no one came forward at the trial to defend Jesus, because nobody in Jerusalem would do that.
That's exactly right.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah.
There's a fascinating thing, and I think we lose that. Those Galilean folk that we love, those fisher folk that we think are the salt of the earth and we all love to talk about, I'll say this because I'm from Alabama. They really are like the Alabama folk of Israel. They're the ones that they live in the poor houses. They're poor. It's a hard scrabble kind of life that they lead. They've got some very funny ideas about power. They got some very funny ideas about religion. They're deeply, deeply religious, but they don't spend much time in Jerusalem. In fact, in the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus only goes to Jerusalem once. I mean, in Luke, he goes in, his parents take him to the temple for that. But it's like, as an adult, his ministry is all in Jericho and Galilee. He's never hanging out in Jerusalem until he keeps saying, I got to go to Jerusalem. It's like, almost like the same way the king hung out in Montgomery, Alabama, which was off the radar, right? He wasn't in Birmingham. He wasn't in Atlanta. He wasn't in Washington, D.C. It's not until 63. It's like, we've got to go to Washington, D.C. That same kind of thing is what's going on in this trip to Jerusalem. It's like we've been hanging out in Selma, and we've been hanging out in Montgomery, we've been hanging out in Athens, Georgia, but Memphis, we're gonna have to go. We're gonna have to go to DC. And that's the kind of thing. Lisa?
There, she said in your conversation, she said that Jesus didn't think of himself as
Is God?
yeah, but that others did, and that kind of threw me back.
I think what she's saying there, and having been several classes with her, is she's saying that the full humanity of Jesus is not the kind of stuff where he wakes up every morning and says, "Oh, I'm deified, I'm God, you know, let me get back to work as God." You know, Jesus is being driven by a very understandable, a very deep and understandable compassion that's deeply human. Okay, he's the God in him is greatly outraged by this, but he also is a prophet and a rabbi, and is just a deeply moved person, the same way that we are touched by injustice, the same way that we get really riled up about things like that. That's driving Jesus too. And I think what she's trying to get us to do is to take the halo off of Jesus, you know, and think that I was in it's a funny story. So I was in an atonement class that she taught, where we had a lot of visitors, because this is one of her famous fields of work, right, is atonement. And so Joanne's going to teach a week-long atonement class, and they pile in from everywhere. People got on airplanes, and it was just this big class that she was teaching. And she got up and she started talking about, we got to let Jesus be human. Y'all, we have to let him stop for bathroom breaks. And it upset certain people in the room. Were just horrified that you would talk about Jesus that way. And so when she says that Jesus didn't think of himself as God, I think what she's wanting to say is he's so deeply in touch with his humanity that it is not like he's walking around I'm in the God boat all the time, right? You know, let me just get over here because I'm God.
She used the word, she didn't say he didn't think of himself as God. I thought she said he didn't think of himself as being a sacrifice, but his followers did.
That was a different comment. Comment. What she was saying was not that he didn't think of himself as a sacrifice, but he did not think that his death was a replacement for the sacrificial system. Because, and if you know, the early church, they continued to go to the temple to pray. They continued to be a part of the Jewish cult for a long, long time, and continued to do sacrifices and everything. So it was not originally set up that this idea that Jesus replaced the sacrifice, that became later became an evolving doctrine. Yeah.
10th century or 11th century with it was the I think the most ancient idea in origin was a ransom theory.
Yes.
Yes. That Jesus died to kind of still take back from the devil the people and reconciling the world.
There are all these theories of atonement, and that's one of the big ones, right? You know, it's like it is that we were being held captive by Satan's power, and Satan had demanded a ransom. And there are certain scriptures that said Jesus Christ was a ransom for all, which is sort of a poetic way of saying that the love that we experience from Jesus on the cross is that transformative thing that anybody can access. It's something that anybody can understand, right? And as a result of that, somebody got all very literal. It always happens when people get too literal. And all of a sudden it was like, well, you know what, our lives mattered enough that the only way that our lives could be saved was if somebody else gave up a life, but nobody was pure enough to be a good sacrifice. And so God had to take on human life to give up human life. And now that's how the ransom works. And then you get into substitution, you get all this crazy stuff. And I don't want to diminish it. All I just want to say is that the answer is so obvious. It's right. And I think that's what Dr. Terrell, he loved so much. He was so outraged. He was willing to put his own life on the line to fight injustice, to say, if it kills me, it kills me. If it takes me, it takes me. And that is a human move as much as a divine move. And when we lose touch with Jesus' humanity, and we think that what he's come is to come to blow away what was already in practice, it just gets way operatic, and it turns far more, it just gets so big, and we lose touch with the humility of God, to use a phrase that I love, and the humanity of Jesus all at once. If that helps any, I don't know if that helps everybody. It's a much better story to say that God would do it this way, as opposed to God came up to revolutionize the Jewish religion. You know, that all of a sudden gets very particular to me. But I don't know. And I'm glad my mother's not at Bible study, because she'd be casting the devils out of me right now.
She would. But it is interesting that, you know, historically, that fully human, fully divine idea took a really long time to kind of to have a consensus. You know, it took centuries for that idea. But one of the consequences of that is we love to talk about the divinity of Jesus, and we spend so much energy on it. But when it comes to passages like the one tonight where he curses a fig tree, or where he gets it wrong with the Syrophoenician woman, we don't want to offer, like, we don't want to extend the humanness of Jesus.
Right. And sometimes even when Jesus is at his most divine, he's also at his most human.
Right. Yeah.
My favorite passage in all of the Gospels is in Mark, where he has sent the boys out in the boat. Y'all get on out in the road. I'll catch you on the other side. I need some time to myself. You all just cross the lake. I'll get out there. Now, these are fishermen. I love this. These are fishermen. And they've been they make their living in boats. But all of a sudden, a storm kicks up, and Jesus has been off praying and kind of having some, you know, self-care and alone time. And they're in a storm, and according to Mark and everybody, they just don't know what to do. And it's like, what, you've never been in a storm before? This is your business. What's wrong with you? And they're out there, you know, and the boat's getting tossed, and and they look up, and here comes Jesus just walking across the water. And they start saying, Jesus, you got to come save us. You got to come save us. And Jesus gets ticked off. And he kind of says, what's wrong with you? Where's your faith? Didn't I, effectively, and written in that is, didn't I say I would meet you on the other side? If I said we were going to meet on the other side, you were going to get across the lake. That's kind of the way that it goes. But folded in there is one of my favorite things, where it says he's ticked off with them because he intended to pass them by. He was going to let them keep floating in their boat, and he was just going to scoot on right past and be waiting for them when they came to shore. He's just going to walk across. And I love that, because it's God who's walking on the water, but it's a very human thing. It's like, I don't need to be bothered with them. You know, they're on the slow boat. Let me just get on over here, figure out what's going on. I'll see y'all later, right? And it ticks him off that they have interrupted his walk across the Lake of Galilee. I love that. It just cracks me up. He intended to pass them by. And there's something about me that makes me just love Jesus a whole lot there. Maybe it's just because I'm no good in traffic. Maybe that's part of it. You know, but I understand that whole thing. Yeah, let me just get on over. I'll see them later. So there is this, but yet at that moment, he's probably at the most divine imaginable. He's defying every law of gravity and physics, just traipsing along on the water. And yet there's this huge human moment that emerges in that. And I think that's magnificent. What else y'all thinking? This atonement question is going to keep coming up. It's going to keep coming up. And the one thing that's very interesting is that Jesus offers a really wonderful note of hope for the temple, even as he's talking about his destruction, because he's talking about that everything is seasonal. And there's a great, in the Black church, the way we translate that is trouble don't last always, okay? I'm so glad trouble don't last always. Everything is seasonal, because he says, if you look at the fig tree, while he's saying the end is near, he says, if you look at the fig tree, it goes through seasons, it goes through change. And so I think that that's something that we lose track of in our own lives and in our faith walk. You know, there are times whenever it seems like this stuff is just too hard. And then it's like, well, trouble don't last always. You'll come on through it. You'll get through it. Because that's what Jesus is saying. Even when he's saying this temple, like the state that it's in right now, it's got to fall. It's a disaster. But it doesn't mean that's the end of God's presence in this community. The fig tree it'll come back again. So it's almost like a triple-decker sandwich, right? It's the fig tree, and then Peter sees the fig tree, and then Jesus comes back and talks about the fig tree one more time. And I think that's kind of beautiful. Any other thoughts?
You know, Tim, I'm not sure how much this has to do with like what you were saying about, traffic, as well as what Shay was saying about the commodity, and that, how important that, meat can be, but if you look at the Egyptian religion, you have no idea how important the Nile was to ancient Egypt.
Yeah.
I mean, the Nile River. We think of it as like, the river, but to the people of ancient Egypt, it was literally, it fed their crops. It provided a place for them to get water. It provided a place for the animals to get water. It was literally the source of all life. Because, I mean, beyond the cities, it was just a vast desert.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's true. I think, well, one of the things is, and Shay's been there, I've not been there yet, but everybody that goes to, and if any of you have done the whole Israel Holy Land thing, everybody runs to the Jordan and then they're always underwhelmed. Yeah, Jeff, have you been there? And it's like, what is that? It's like, this is the Jordan? Okay, this is what this is. It's interesting how cultures are built and stories and narratives arise out of the landscape, literally out of the landscape. And I think that's wonderful.
Just like the Mona Lisa, Tim, what you were saying about
Yeah.
how sort of on Wednesday, just like the Mona Lisa. It's almost the size of this pillow right here,
Mhm.
or even smaller. It's smaller. I think it's smaller than this pillow. It's just like the size of an normal sheet of timber, and like that's one of the most famous paintings in history.
There is always that moment in the Louvre when you get to the Mona Lisa and you can't see it for all the heads that are in the way because it's about the size of your computer screen, or the goldfinch or the girl with pearl earring. These paintings are not huge, and I'm always sort of amazed by that, where it's like, oh my Lord, as just some of we spent a lot of time in Paris, and we would have people that would meet us there, and they'd say, tell us about the Louvre and what should we do? And it's like, well, here's the room with the Mona Lisa. You're not going to see it, but just walk in the room so you at least can say you were in the room with it. You're not going to see it. It's because there's going to be 1,000 people between you and it, unless you camp out there and wait for your turn. It's just the way that it works. Next week, speaking of works of art, we're going to talk about this amazing woman who does this amazing thing. She seems to know something's going on in a way that's 10 times more profound than the people that are closest to Jesus. And this is if you get a chance to read it, this will be in Mark 14. Make sure that you look at this text and spend some time and think about, I'd be very interested in thinking, what do you think about the woman who shows up and out of nowhere and pours a very expensive ointment all over Jesus and immediately gets canceled by everybody in the room, immediately gets shamed by everybody in the room. And Jesus kind of puts a stop to it because he's saying, she knows something. She knows something that I've been telling you all and you all don't get. And so it's a really lovely, it's a very poignant story.
What I heard was that it was worth the equivalent of like $40,000 today or something.
It could be
an extraordinary amount of money.
An extraordinary amount of money. And then the question became, where did she get that money? Where'd she get that from? Who is this woman? And that's why.
Yeah, I don't think they cared where she got it. They didn't like that she was wasting it.
But it wasn't theirs. Right?
Yeah, it wasn't theirs.
Yeah.
But it's a study in human nature. We don't want to see things we don't want to see things wasted. We think, it's a rationalization that she'll use it for the poor. You just think, well, what I could do with that money.
Well, that's exactly. I have a problem, and I'm gonna make a confession here. I have a problem with Maggie Daley Park in downtown Chicago.
Do you?
Which is like a $5 million park set in a community of high rises where there are no children. Okay, this is this beautiful park that's there for tourists to look and see how beautiful. While on the south side and the west side, the parks are falling apart. The schools don't have books. There are no art supplies, no art programs for the kids. But we have spent millions of dollars on Maggie Daley Park.
Are you trying to say society's not well run, Tim?
what I'm trying to say is that I
There's no equity? What are you trying to say? No, not this world. You're not talking about this world, are you?
Well, I think what I'm saying is I think I understand that impulse that they have all too well. What does she think she's doing? Especially
Right.
the Jesus who doesn't even have a house. Jesus is the least materialistic person in the world, and it would be like suddenly somebody handed me a pair of, I don't know, here's a whole set of Louis Vuitton luggage. It's like, what am I gonna do with that? You know, my Samsonite holds they keep my clothes dry.
I gotta pay my rent. What is
Yeah, you know, right. And so
Yeah,
it's that kind of inequity. But what she's doing,
Judith on that one.
yeah, what she's doing is powerful because she is on the same wavelength that Jesus is on. And it goes back to, and I'm very excited to hear what Dr. Terrell has to say about her, because Jesus knows he's going to die. He knew the minute that he keeps saying, I'm going to Jerusalem and they're going to kill me. I'm going to get up on the third day, but I got to go and I got to face these people and they're going to kill me. He tells them 3 times before they ever get to Jerusalem, this is the plan. We're going in, they're going to take me out. But they're not going to keep me out. But they're going to take me out. And she understands it. And the people that he's been saying this to are more concerned about how much is being wasted. And this is about a life that's about to be wasted.
Everybody think human nature. We think that we can do better. We think we know better. That we could do better with that money. We know what we should do. And when really we'd probably take more than half of it. and would the poor ever get any of it? What are fees for, you know?
Oh my gosh, isn't it?
Administration fees.
It's exactly right. You know, it's like that's the way it goes. And you just kind of like, so what am I paying for this now? Well, speaking of money, here's the let's give slide. You all have been so faithful in your giving and generous. And we sent out giving notices. I hope you all got them. If you didn't, reach out to me for last year's stuff. I want to make sure that you all have that. But it's always a pleasure just to know that we are all in this together. And my final thing is, I just cannot tell you how I'm seeing the service come together for Sunday. It is going to be really wonderful. Now, God, as we leave this place, we're glad that you're there. And we're glad that you care. And that you find us in our need. And you do what you can do for us. And I pray now that Deborah and Phoebe, so many others in this that are attached in one way or another to this community, are struggling on so many levels with so many things. And God, I'm grateful that you have called us and brought us together so that we could join together in prayer on their behalf. What a blessing and a privilege that is. And now I pray that you will be with us as we leave this time of study and fellowship and family together. I pray that as we go into this weekend, that you will be with us and bring joy to us. Keep us mindful of the things we can be praying for and we should be praying for and those we can be praying for. And bring us together on this coming Sunday into Wilbert's study, into wherever we go to church in the morning, and back at Gather for a time of the family celebration together. We just love you. We do. We just love you. And we're so glad because we know that you love us. And we thank you for this time together. And we lift all of this to you in the name of the God-man who went into the temple and you taught us how to love. Amen.